This is Carmen Croan, your everyday 18-year-old.
Anybody that you talk to that knew Carmen then just talks about what a nice, sweet girl she was. I mean, you know, there's no drama.
She was happy. She was charming.
And she was just one of those quiet, petite, real sweet young girls. I mean, she was really quiet.
She was just a very cheerful, very optimistic, very friendly person.
Come along with me, for I want to see this man walking on the water.
She had a loving family.
Carmen was my sister. She was a couple of years younger than me.
I actually went to school with Carmen and her brother. She was a year younger than me and he was a year older than me. A great family.
We played a lot of games together, you know, when we were at home. We did have a lot of good times together. We would go camping a lot, and I was in Boy Scouts and stuff, and did backpacking and stuff, and so anytime we would go camping, I always kind of had to watch out for her, and I guess it was always kind of a protective thing.
Let's all go down to the river.
She was just a normal girl living a normal life in 1981. She had just graduated from Permian High with her whole life ahead of her. That is, until someone took that all away.
Back in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of things for young people in Odessa to do. So one of the things that young people did, myself included, was you would go out to the bars.
A bar to be at in the 80s was Graham Central Station.
It was packed from one end of the parking lot, from all the way to Grandview, all the way to 8th Street. There was thousands of people in that club. It's
just where you gathered. I mean, a lot of people went in there and all you did was dance. That's where you went to meet up with your friends and dance and meet new people and that sort of thing. And you would go from, like I said, there was a whole strip of bars in that area that were nice, real clean, very good establishments, and that's just where people went back then. When you were a young adult, that's where you went back then.
And Carmen Croan was no exception.
And that's what she had done that night. She'd gone over there and met up with her friends and was hanging out there waiting on her boyfriend to show up. At some point, she went out into the parking lot and there were people that saw her go into the parking lot, and then that's the last that anybody knows of her. The next day, a oilfield worker or landowner had been driving around checking his land and found her body out on an oilfield lease.
Her body was nude. She lay on her back, spread eagle, and her clothes, from what I remember, were fairly neatly folded beside her body.
What they did to her was very, very horrific.
I can remember when it happened that it shocked me that it would happen to her, because she was that, I mean, it was just a shock, because she was just a sweet, nice. I mean, she was nice to people. I can still remember her sitting in orchestra. She just smiled a lot.
A smile her family would never see again.
Dad called me and he goes, well, something's happened to Carmen. And it was a little hard to take, the shock. Is this real? Did this really happen? Why did this happen to her? Why is this happening to us?
But most importantly, the family wanted to know who was responsible for murdering Carmen. The police wanted to know that too, and they had one of their best men on the job, David Saunders.
He just was an investigating genius.
He was a very thorough, he was one heck of an investigator.
You can tell that David's whole heart was in this. I mean, he did everything he possibly could to figure out who this was. And you'll find, if you talk to homicide investigators, you'll find that every one of them have those cases that they lose sleep over. It's the ones that they think about, it's constantly on their mind. Whether it's a solved case or an unsolved case, it imprints on their brain and on their heart. And I think this is one that, this was David's case.
David's case was a particularly difficult one. David himself called it not an everyday murder. The only evidence they had to go on was blood-stained clothes found several miles from the crime scene and some bite marks on Carmen's body. They didn't know the motive, they didn't even have a murder weapon yet, but based on the body, they figured it was probably a fixed blade knife with at least an 8-inch blade, but they couldn't know for sure. And after a while, the painfully complex, not everyday murder went silent. And silence causes all sorts of rumors, most rooted in fiction.
The media released that I had been arrested and confessed to a murder.
In a case like this one, everyone's a suspect, especially if you worked at the last place the victim was seen.
Well, in 1981, I was actually working at Graham Central Station nightclub here in Odessa where she was abducted.
And some people thought they already knew who the killer was, Charles Hostetter.
The media released that I had been arrested and confessed to a murder. So, you know, people coming to my house and were talking to me and thought I'd been arrested.
If you're from Odessa, the name Charlie Hostetter might ring a bell.
Gary Mason is the other big hitter in the lawless camp alongside Frank Bruno. Gary Mason, it is back to you now against the white American Charles Hostetter from Odessa, Texas.
You know, Charlie was kind of a celebrity around here, but of his boxing.
And then I was also a professional fighter. I fought all over the world. I fought in Wembley Arena, I fought in Royal Albert Hall, I fought in Medieval Castle, Caesar's Palace, fought in, just had a really good career. I fought people like George Foreman, Tommy Morrison, Andrew Galata, Marvis Frazier.
But before he became a notable fighter, Charlie was already well known to one group, law enforcement.
So we had a lot of street fights, so on and so forth. And I was arrested numerous times back for street fighting. So the police did not like me. That's the beginning of the story.
So why is he relevant to this story?
Because I was falsely accused of the terrible, terrible, horrific murder of this little girl back in 1981.
That girl was Carmen Croan. According to Charlie, every cop in the city of Odessa had it out for him. But even they couldn't deny that Hostetter was not involved in this murder, as one of their own was working undercover in the same club the night of the murder.
And the night that it took place, there was actually a man working in there. He actually worked in the club. He was put in there by Bob Brookshire, who was the sheriff of Odessa, to investigate things going on in Odessa, Texas. The night that Carmen was murdered, I was out in the parking lot emptying the trash, and I threw a trash bag over into the dumpster. It didn't go in, so I pushed up on the bottom, and my beer bottle just got a big hole in my thumb. So I had to go to the emergency room. Well,
and guess who took Charlie to the emergency room? The undercover cop.
Same night Carmen was murdered. Same night. I was never interviewed, never, because apparently they knew I was with this undercover sheriff at the emergency room, so I was never interviewed about this. People that come out and said I was at the district attorney's office being interviewed, I was never up there. I never was even questioned about this case.
To my knowledge, me or David, either one, ever thought Charlie did it. Of course we looked into it, but there's also 100 other people we looked into.
I feel kind of sorry for the way he was treated, because he was one of the ones that was harassed, even though he was a bouncer at the club that night.
Knowing he was innocent, Charles counterpunched the radio stations that ran the story.
And we sued the radio stations and had to do a deposition, the whole 9 yards, and we settled it out of court.
Fortunately for Hostetter, this didn't affect his boxing career, and 3 years later, he even fought George Foreman himself. Despite his innocence, even today, Charles says people still think he did this murder.
I just thought, this is a bad rumor.
A bad rumor that has lasted 4 decades.
This 40 years we're still talking about it.
They're also still talking about a man who, to police, does have reason to be questioned. After months of silence in the case, a new suspect emerges, and his name is Murray Galloway. But it wasn't Carmen's murder that put Galloway on police's radar, but an entirely different crime altogether.
There's a guy named Steve Compton, lived on the west side of Odessa. One day, Murray Galloway shows up at his door. He's house sitting for his sister and her husband. So he just bulldogged in the house, he zip-tied him, took him in a car.
After the abduction, Galloway stopped at a service station, and his victim saw his opportunity to escape.
And this guy was able to grab a door handle and roll out, get out of the car. He was zip-tied, his legs and hands were tied. He rolls out on the ground and starts hollering. The attendants, people come over, they got Murray Galloway, and they called the police. Ector County went back there to Andrews to pick him because it happened in Ector County.
The way we got onto Murray, he had a whole pot full of knives.
Similar to the knife investigators thought killed Carmen Croan. And according to sources, Galloway frequented the spot Carmen was kidnapped from.
He always seemed to show up at the bars there a lot, from what I understand from people who worked at the bar, that he was there a lot.
Went back and got pictures. They had a camera of people dancing. And Murray's in there. He claimed he never was in that bar, but he was in there, we could see.
Oh wow, just put Murray right on the suspect list. A couple weeks later, the blood-stained clothes found a week after Carmen's death revealed that her hair particles were found on the clothes, and investigators thought these clothes belonged to Galloway. And after a 4-month-long investigation, police thought they had their guy, and Murray Galloway was indicted for the murder. And to many, it seemed like police had found their killer. Galloway was called volatile, unpredictable, loud, arrogant, among other things by psychiatrists. The scariest of all was that he was capable of homicidal potential.
He was one strange person. I mean, this guy was flat scary.
But Galloway didn't work alone. He also had a traveling partner, and his name was Lonnie Lee Crago.
Murray Galloway, and there was a guy named Lonnie Lee Crago. One day he would be this personality, and the next day he'd be another personality. So they assuming he had schizophrenia.
If you ever met a true schizophrenic, he was. He started telling us all this. He would be Bible quote, scripture, word for word, intelligent guy, and then the next minute he'd go back to being this other guy. And then when he went back to his other one, he couldn't even write his name.
So Lonnie Crago was brought in as a witness and was questioned by deputies.
I mean, Lonnie just knew too much not to have been there. Of course, he was scared to death of Murray.
Lonnie Lee Crago, who was the only witness against Murray Galloway. That's all their whole case is based on that.
Anyway, he rolled over and said that they kidnapped her at Graham's and took her out there, and that Murray, who he called Eli, Murray is the one that cut her up. He started telling us all about where they were, where they went. They went back up to Albuquerque. So I took Lonnie. We had Murray in jail for kidnapping a guy. And I put Lonnie right in a separation cell right next to it. And I heard him tell Murray, Eli, they got us this time. And then Murray says, shut up.
Oh, wow.
We were in Albuquerque. Oh, yeah, we were in Albuquerque. So next time I talked to him, he wasn't even there, he was in Albuquerque. But putting all this together obviously would lead a normal person to think Murray Galloway is involved in it. We were ready to go forward with capital murder, but we had, over a period of weeks, put together what I thought was pretty substantial.
They thought they had enough to convict Carmen's killer for good. That is, until fate had other plans. And for a while, it was going well, until the star witness was gone.
I know that Crago had some testimony that needed to be heard, and once he died, that they were not able to do that.
Before the case could move forward, Crago died in an oil field accident.
He sat down next to a pump jack and laid his head over on the concrete slab that the pump jack was on and crushed his skull. The only thing he had in his pocket was David Saunders' card with the name Eli written on the back. Murray, who he called Eli.
Some think it was an accident. Some think it was suicide.
And I don't know that he did it because he thought he was going to go to prison, or Eli told him to. Or...
At first, this didn't seem like a problem for prosecutors. They still felt their case would go through, even without the only witness against Galloway. The prosecution still had the bite marks on Carmen's body, which they claimed matched Galloway.
They had some bite marks on Carmen that were a huge part of the case.
And the prosecution brought in their expert, who backed up their theory.
Our forensic orthodontist said that was a positive match for the bite mark on Carmen. Naturally, his side, the attorney, was going to say, no, that's not a bite mark.
But the defense had an expert too, Dr. Richard Souvron, notable for his testimony in the Ted Bundy case. In that case, Dr. Souvron helped prove that bite marks on the victim were in fact those of the famous serial killer. But in Carmen's case, he wasn't so sure.
He came into Odessa for the defense to say it was not Murray Galloway's bite marks.
In fact, Souvron wasn't certain if they were bite marks at all, and deemed the state's prime piece of evidence as worthless. Due to conflicting opinions, the case was at a crossroads. Even Galloway's attorney, who at first thought he was guilty, was now completely convinced his client didn't do it. And without the testimony of Lonnie Lee Crago, the prosecution was out of options, and the murder charges against Galloway were dismissed.
So Murray Galloway's released. He was released to the Albuquerque, New Mexico officials. He had stuff pending there, and I think he went to penitentiary for years.
And it was pretty bad that he was never convicted, even though all of the evidence pointed at him.
Leaving the investigators to start from square one, even though in their mind, they felt it was definitely Murray Galloway.
I believe they think they had the right person. That's why they took him to court, tried to get that all taken care of there, and it kind of fell apart on them. From that point on, investigators basically had to start over, you know, and I'm only guessing that in their minds, you know, they believed they had the right person. And so it was a matter of gathering up more information. With Crago dead now, they had to go back in, and I just believe that, I believe that they believed that Galloway is the one that did it.
Despite their belief, the investigation had to start all over, devastating David Saunders.
David would, and me too for that matter, have always been convinced that Murray Galloway did this.
And David Saunders had no doubt, not a doubt, who did this to that little girl.
Cops have a tendency to get tunnel vision. You know, just because you have tunnel vision don't mean you're wrong.
That case took its toll on David, and I think that's the reason he could never, let it go, and it affected his health, and it caused him to drink too much.
And I think David Saunders died knowing that in his mind that Galloway was the one that did it. He could just never get the evidence to prove that.
David died in 2009, not knowing for sure who killed Carmen Croan.
This was David's case. This was the one that if he had any regrets over not being able to find out who did it, this would be his case.
But his legacy lives on. Even today, people are still trying to find answers in Carmen's case. Galloway also died in the 2000s, so even if evidence did point towards him, it would be difficult to charge him.
And I'll always believe it's Murray Galloway. There's no doubt in my mind. There never was.
But the people that did this to Carmen need to be brought to justice. Even if he's died, I believe 100% it was Murray Galloway and Lonnie Crago.
But not everyone is convinced.
I always thought it was done by the same perpetrator. I mean, the same man that killed Janet Grexton. He rambled on about Janet, and every once in a while he would kind of allude to Carmen as well. And it's my thinking, and he probably got the two mixed up, when he was talking. It was for that reason I thought that he was probably good for both of the murders.
One of the unique things about reopening cases and putting another set of eyes on them is getting to hear the new investigators that are researching and reading through there, and some of those guys have a doubt. I mean, they have some doubt as to whether or not it really was Galloway. These new investigators that are looking at it are able to use some different tools and maybe come up with something different. So, I wasn't part of this in the day when they arrested Galloway and they went through all of that. I believe that we've got some new resources that might point in a different direction.
Even though it is cold, there's still hope this case will be solved.
I've talked to several people that said it's still a solvable case, that it's solvable, and that with some of the new resources that are out there, that it's possible that they'll be able to go a different route. Whether that points to Galloway and says for sure that it was Galloway and puts an end to that, and we know that for a fact at that point, then that may be the conclusion. It could turn out to be someone else, and if it does, then that person needs to be brought to trial and get some justice for Carmen and for her family.
And the Croan family who's been living this for more than 40 years, could use that justice. David Saunders called this a murder like no other. Now, it's a cold case like no other. Solving this case would be an incredible feat, whether it proves to be Murray Galloway or someone else. And if this cold case gets solved, a cold case like no other, it'll show that any cold case can get solved.